expects his cabinet officials and the administration to follow the law and to demand accountability and hold people accountable for their dangerous rhetoric. And I would just add that if this were Republican members
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes.
Government to defy orders from the president and from the chain of command, this entire room would be up in arms. But instead, it is the other way around, and I think that's quite telling. I'm going to let you all go because the president, I appreciate the encouragement this morning, this afternoon, but President Trump is about to meet in minutes with
the Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yep. Okay. All right, here we go. We have a bit of a complicated A block, so I just want to explain it and go over the clips. Here are the
Yeah, go ahead.
Crockett, CNN 2.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network.
Crockett, CNN 3. Crockett, CNN 4. Crockett, CNN 5.
Okay.
So I'm going to do it in that order, all in the A block.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 4 minutes. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return in 1 minute. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 45 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 30 seconds.
Have a good show, everybody. Here we go. It's time for common sense for the American people.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 15 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 5 seconds.
He's not just the conservative voice at CNN. He's the last man standing athwart the leftist mob, delivering the fiery truth, surrounded, outnumbered, still undefeated. Fighting for free speech, Western civilization, and delivering common sense for the American people. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Scott Jennings.
All right, it's Thursday, November 20th. Common sense for the American people. The voice of reason is here. Scott Jennings on the Salem Radio Network. The Scott Jennings Show is sponsored by Ease Total Health. Health insurance is broken. Ease, E-A-S-E, fixes it with no deductibles, no red tape, and real benefits from day one. These guys know what they're doing. Go to easeforeveryone.com/Scott, and it is day 3 of the common sense revolution sweeping the nation. You do not want to be left out of this conversation. Get your copy of my new book, A Revolution of Common Sense, today. Walk into a bookstore and buy it. Go on Amazon and buy it. It's hitting number 1 in several Amazon categories. I'm really grateful to everyone out there who's buying the book. It's flying off the shelves, they tell me. And I was in New York City last night, several hundred people turning out. The Manhattan Institute hosted a book party. My hand is still shaking from all the signing I did last night. Thanks to everybody who came out in Manhattan. to get their copy of A Revolution of Common Sense. Breaking news today, it sounds like Ukraine's Zelensky is ready to negotiate with Trump on this emerging peace plan to end the war. New details coming out today. Coming up at 33 minutes past the hour, we have foreign policy and national security expert Rebecca Heinrichs joining the show. Is a peace possible? We'll see what Rebecca thinks. At 2:22 today, 22 minutes past the hour, the jobs report came out today. It beat expectations from the Department of the Treasury. Top counselor to Scott Bessent, Joe Lavorgna, joins us to go over the latest data. Other news, I want to start with Jeffrey Epstein. I want to zoom in on the narrative. The narrative from Democrats and the media is that this is a story about Trump and Epstein. That's what they want you to believe. But what we are finding out is that this is a story about Epstein and Democrats. Here are the facts. Trump got rid of Epstein. When Trump realized Epstein was a complete and total creep, he excommunicated him from his life. Long time ago. But Democrats never did. In fact, Democrats cozied up to Epstein long after he was a convicted sex criminal. Now, on the floor of the United States House this week, Congressman Jamie Comer, friend of the show from Kentucky, detailed attempts by Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries to raise money, political money, from Epstein. And we know Epstein was programming Democratic members of Congress in 2019, long after he was convicted, telling them what to do, telling them what to say. It's all known now. We know all the facts now. And the fact that this is out in the public domain has freaked out the Democratic Party, freaked them out. The narrative is crumbling. So, to fight back, they sent their leader. They sent the highest IQ person they could think of, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, to the floor of the House to fight back. And she began to make this argument right here.
Who also took money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein, as I had my team dig in very quickly. Mitt Romney, the NRCC, Lee Zeldin, George Bush, Win Red, McCain Palin, Rick Lazio.
So Crockett says, hey, Republicans took money from Epstein too. Checkmate? Hardly. It turns out it was a different Jeffrey Epstein. A doctor, in fact. Literally a different guy. They Googled the name. They pulled the campaign finance records, but they never bothered to ask themselves, is this actually the same Jeffrey Epstein? Well, it wasn't. So Crockett, the highest IQ person in the Democratic Party, has blundered into a major embarrassing screw-up here in an attempt to restore the narrative. Now, if this were you or me or a rational human being, we would apologize for being such morons and disgracing the United States House of Representatives. But what did Crockett do? Well, she went on CNN last night and had this exchange with Caitlin Collins.
Do you want to correct the record on the people that
Listen, I never said that it was that Jeffrey Epstein, just so that people understand when you make a donation, your picture is not there. And because they decided to spring this on us in real time, I wanted the Republicans to think about what could potentially happen, because I knew that they didn't even try to go through the FEC. So my team, what they did is they Googled, and that is specifically why I said a Jeffrey Epstein. Unlike Republicans, I at least don't go out and just tell lies. Because it was not the same one, that's fine. But when Lee Zeldin had something to say, all he had to say was it was a different Jeffrey Epstein. He admitted that he did receive donations from a Jeffrey Epstein. So at least I wasn't trying to mislead people. Now, have I dug in to find out who this doctor is? I have not.
Folks, I know what you were thinking. How is this person allowed to be a congressman instead of, say, a resident of an insane asylum? It is a mystery. However, the implosion on CNN continued. Here's more of Crockett, the smartest Democrat they could find to speak about this on the House floor. Let's listen to Crockett.
But I was not attempting to mislead anybody. I literally had maybe 20 minutes before I had to do that debate.
Yeah, but people might see that and say, well, you're trying to make it sound like he took money from
I did not
a
know.
registered sex offender.
No, but I literally did not know. When you search FEC files, and that's what I had my team to do, I texted them and I said, listen, we're going up. They are saying that she took donations.
Right, but someone might say, well, your team should have done the homework to make sure it wasn't the convicted sex trafficker.
Within 20 minutes, you could not find that out, not from just doing a quick search on FEC.
I am playing this for you so that you can see how dumb, how mind-numbingly dumb these Democrats actually are. Now, mind you, Crockett's the highest IQ person they have. But more than that, this is how dumb they think their supporters are. Here's more, by the way. The underlying question was, why are Democratic members of Congress like Stacey Plaskett texting with Jeffrey Epstein in 2019? Listen to this.
But do you think that was inappropriate? I mean, would you text with someone who is a registered sex offender about what you should ask?
I honestly know that he had never been convicted of any federal crimes at that time.
But he had been in jail already.
He had been
got
in
a
jail.
plea deal.
I have never, ever seen an implosion like this on live TV in 10 years of being in the cable news business. There is more here as Crockett continued to defend Stacey Plaskett. That's the Democrat that Epstein was controlling and programming. Here is how she wrapped up her argument to CNN.
Then I'm not going to say that that's right or wrong, especially to the extent that you're talking about kicking someone off their committee. Were they sexting? Was it a matter of her being involved in the pedophilia? No, it was nothing like that. She was trying to understand.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She is the smartest person in the Democratic Party. She does most of their interviews. She speaks for them. She is the future of their party. She is considering running for the United States Senate from Texas. And if she enters the primary, she will win their primary. And I just wanted you to hear what the future of our country could sound like if all of you within the sound of my voice do not sober up about the stakes of the next couple of elections. You're listening to the Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network. I want to give you some information from our good friends at Relief Factor. We get letters, by the way. Letters from satisfied customers. Here's one from Christopher, who is a cabinet maker. Now, in Christopher's case, years of hard work took a toll on his elbows. Even simple joys became hard. But Christopher found Relief Factor. He told us, quote, "It has helped me so much, I can even enjoy bowling again, along with all the other fun things that I love to do." For Christopher, Relief Factor gave him back more than just comfort. It gave him back his lifestyle. And I want you to ask yourself, what could it give you? We're using it in the Jennings household. I like it. My father, by the way, who, by the way, is featured in my book, A Revolution of Common Sense, he's using it. He loves it. He's as spry as ever. He's bouncing all over the place. Try their 3-week quick start today. Go to relieffactor.com or call 1-800-4RELIEF. When we come back, Joe Lavorgna from Treasury is here. Jobs report looks good. We'll hear all about it. Scott Jennings, Common Sense on the Salem Radio Network.
If I come out like a dream, will you let me show you what I mean? Will you let me come on inside?
Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 4 minutes.
All I want is a remedy for all of the things that me. Ooh, I will take a look.
Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Baby, baby, why you got your hair? Why you always keep with your mother's hair?
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes.
Tell me, did the other troubles going on you? If I come on like a dream, ooh, will you let me show you what I mean? Will you let me come?
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
All I want is a remedy for all of the things that me. I would totally take up now to please
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 1 minute and 30 seconds.
I need a remedy, yeah. But what is ailing me, you see? I need a remedy. But what is ailing me? I need a remedy, yeah. But what's ailing me? If I only had a remedy, you
The
see.
Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return in 1 minute. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 45 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 15 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 5 seconds.
Fighting the left with the best weapon we have, common sense. This is the Scott Jennings Show.
It's Thursday, November the 20th. A lot of news today. At 33 minutes past the hour, we're going to get into this emerging story about whether a peace plan is possible between Russia and Ukraine. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, briefing on that a little bit at the podium just a little while ago. Rebecca Heinrichs will be here to discuss the implications of this. And the jobs report came out today. With us now, Joe Livornia, one of the nation's top economists. He is serving as a counselor to our Treasury Secretary, the Beast, Scott Bessent. Joe, you're here to discuss the jobs report, beating expectations. Thanks for coming back on the Scott Jennings Show. The numbers look solid. Tell us what we found in the data today, Joe.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. The numbers were solid, especially relative to expectations, 119,000 jobs, best since April. And I think the most important part of it is since President Trump took office, we've seen 2.6 million of native-born workers gain employment, and we've actually seen a decline of 1 million workers for foreign-born employment. So the America First, the working attempts by the president are paying off in terms of generating jobs for Americans. And importantly, we're seeing very good wage growth of nearly 4% year on year. So things are looking up. We're seeing good GDP data. The Atlanta Fed revised up its estimate for Q3 GDP data another tenth, 4.2%. That's a boom. That comes after nearly 4% growth in the second quarter. So the numbers look really good. However, Scott, I just want to say one thing before I turn it back over to you, and that is that as good as the economy looks right now, interest rates are weighing on activity. They've depressed affordability for homes. That's the Fed's purview. And, a strong case can be made why the Fed needs to continue to lower interest rates. And that will allow the economy to continue growing very strongly and will allow the economy to reach its full potential.
All right, I want to key in on a couple of things that you raised. This issue of native-born Americans. You say 2.6 million native-born Americans have gained jobs since the president took office, whereas over 1 million foreign-born individuals have lost jobs. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Just slightly more than 1 million, 1.036 million. Yes, that's correct.
All right. Second issue I want to key in on. You talked about the estimates on GDP. I see the Atlanta Fed has raised its estimate of Q3 real GDP growth another tenth to 4.2%. So what we're seeing here is growth in the overall economy. And you also mentioned that we're seeing wage growth. Is it your view that growth in the overall economy and individual wage growth is giving people a chance to defeat cost of living, to defeat any inflation hangover that we have from the Biden years?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And what's important, Scott, is the one big beautiful bill, which the president signed on July 4th, and which the IRS is finishing its full guidelines for the full expensing to build factories. What's really important about that bill, there are two key things, and many key things in it, but two that stand out. Number one is that you're going to get more building next year, and that's going to increase the supply side of the economy. That will lower the inflation rate, and that number one. And number two, you're getting a huge tax refund for those people who are going to benefit from no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. That could be worth about $200 billion almost in refunds. So those are very strong positives, and why we think 2026 is going to be a much better year and getting rid of the Biden inflation and improving affordability for middle and lower income households.
Last issue, as we have a minute to go, it was the August report that showed a 4,000 job decline. We've bounced back in September. The top line number, 119,000 jobs created. This defeated expectations. It reversed what happened in August. Is it your expectation that we are going to continue to see positive job growth throughout the rest of 2025?
Based on President Trump's policies, the trend in job growth is positive going forward and will accelerate if monetary policy is less restrictive. In other words, if money is not tight, we will see even faster job growth, and it will ensure against any weakness in the economy relative to its Trumpian potential, which we know in the first term, Scott, we had 3% plus growth in that last year, and inflation was under 2%. It's a disinflationary boom. The president has laid the fundamentals for a 2026 and beyond disinflationary boom.
That's Joe Livornia, one of the top economists in the nation. We're lucky to have him at the Department of Treasury advising our Secretary, Scott Bessent. Great report today, Joe. We'll have you back when the next set of data comes out. When we come back, Rebecca Heinrichs is here talking possible peace between Russia and Ukraine. Stay with us on the Scott Jennings Show.
Hey, hey, you get out of my cloud. Hey, hey, you get out of my cloud. Don't hang around, bro.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 5 minutes.
I've been run down, I've been lied to, and I don't know why I let that mean woman make me a fool. She took all my money.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network return from break in 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Now she's with one of my good time buddies. They're drinking in some crosstown bar. Sometimes I feel like I've been down to the whipping post. Down to the whipping post.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 4 minutes.
I feel like I'm dying.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
My friends tell me that I've been such a fool.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes.
Oh, for loving you. Drown myself in sorrow as I look at what you've done. But nothing seems to change. The bad times stay the same, and I can't run. Sometimes I feel.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Good Lord, I feel like I'm dying.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return in 1 minute. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 45 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 15 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 5 seconds.
the narratives. Now get the truth. It's the Scott Jennings Show.
Thursday, November the 20th, Scott Jennings here. Salem Radio. Well, what am I looking at, by the way? Kind of scrolling through the news. I am currently looking at a picture of Dick Cheney's funeral. Seated next to each other are Rachel Maddow and Anthony Fauci. What version of Earth am I sitting in right now? Rachel Maddow is at Dick Cheney's funeral? George W. Bush will speak later today. We'll see what he has to say. I honestly, all it takes is for you to hate Donald Trump or vote against Donald Trump or say something negative about Donald Trump. And immediately, the left absorbs you. Here's my tip for everybody. They don't actually like you. They don't want you. You're a useful tool in the moment. They will dump you the minute you are no longer useful. We got Rebecca Heinrichs coming up in just 1 second. We're going to talk about this emerging peace deal between Russia and Ukraine that the White House is floating. Rebecca's our national security and foreign policy expert here at the Scott Jennings Show. First, a quick word about health insurance. It's in the news. The news is not good, as you know. Costs are up. Frustration is up, especially when you try to use your coverage. You know, runaway health insurance costs was the main driver behind the debate over the government shutdown. We'll see what Republicans want to do about it. I actually have some good news for you about healthcare, though. Our new sponsor is Ease Total Health, EASE, Ease. It is not traditional insurance. It is much better. It is a set of benefits that you can use from day one. There are no deductibles and no restrictions on what doctors or hospitals you can choose. They have a range of options to fit every need, every family, and every budget. I can't list it all here, but you can do yourself a favor and visit easeforeveryone.com/Scott or call 888-EASE-123 and check it out for yourself. Don't wait for the government. Don't wait for the big insurance companies to come to the rescue because they never will. Go to easeforeveryone.com/Scott or call 888-EASE-123. All right, it's Scott Jennings here. Common sense for the American people. Our national security expert, Rebecca Heinrichs, is on the line, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Rebecca, thanks for coming back to the Scott Jennings Show. I'm kind of following the news here. The White House has been floating. They may have a peace deal on the table by the end of the week, officially, to try to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, briefed on it a little bit today. And there's some reporting that Zelensky in Ukraine says he's ready to talk to the White House about negotiating this idea. Let me start just with the top line news. What have you heard? What do we know? And where do you think we are in the process of this next attempt to end the war between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, thanks, Scott. Good to be here again with you. So the first thing that I would just say is a lot of the points that are in the media right now are totally unconfirmed by the White House. And so I would just urge a little bit of skepticism as we read the news. It looks like some of the background that's being provided in the media reporting is coming from the Russian side. But what we do know, and what has been confirmed by the Trump officials, especially Caroline, as you just said, is that there is just a new attempt to try to push the two sides to a peaceful outcome of the war. I am very skeptical that with some of the points that are coming out because they look like the maximalist positions on the Russian side. So we don't know yet what Zelensky from the Ukrainian side is willing to concede at this point. But we do know that President Trump is still determined to come to a ceasefire and an end to this war that is lasting. And Secretary Pompeo keeps emphasizing lasting. And I've got some ideas or some hints about what's going to be required for it to be lasting, Scott.
Now, let me ask you a question. You said that a lot of the information that we have coming out about this is coming from the Russian side. So it would be in their best interest, I guess, to, put things out that, put them in what they would see as the strongest position in a negotiation here. When do you think we will hear from the White House more confirmed details? Because it does strike me that it's a little bit harmful to the White House position if we let the Russians control the narrative on this, no?
Definitely. And so, and you can see already a lot of the media is very hysterical. People are panicking, saying that, look, Trump is a Russian asset, all of that silly nonsense. all of that's coming out. I do think, the Russians are trying to get Ukraine in a position so that the Ukrainians seem unreasonable, like they're not willing to make concessions. Look at the Russians, they're willing to do all of these things. But it's all things that are good for Russia, Scott. It's things like getting the Ukrainians to cut their own forces down. It's pushing back on this idea that there's going to be European security guarantees, which is something that President Trump has said that he wants. It's things like, the Ukrainians surrender all of the Donbass, including Donetsk, which is an area where the Russians so far have not been able to take militarily. They've been trying since 2014. And so I would suspect that the Trump administration is going to get together with Ukraine, figure out again what the Ukrainian position is, what the European position is, and then we'll get some clarity as to what the United States is pushing. But one last thing, President Trump has even said recently he's still extremely disappointed with Putin's lack of collaboration or cooperation on this point. So from President Trump himself, I'm not getting any signals that he's willing to take, quote, the side of the Russians to push for capitulation on the part of Ukraine.
Yeah, I have to believe President Trump has still been out of shape about what happened. He had Putin come to Alaska and then completely rebuffed the aftermath of that meeting. There was a frenzied attempt to try to really create momentum to end this war. And Putin completely turned his back on these efforts. You had President Trump rolling out the red carpet for him. You had the Europeans coming to the White House. And Putin, at that moment, just proved to all of us that he's not a rational actor. And he's certainly not someone who is interested in negotiating peace. I think he really only understands strength and he only understands pressure. I'm going to read a tweet to you, Rebecca, from Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. He said, any peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, which weakens Ukraine's ability to defend itself, is a surrender agreement, which guarantees that in the next few years, Putin will overrun all of Ukraine. You agree with that position from Newt Gingrich?
Absolutely. Look, President Trump wants peace. He wants lasting peace, which is why I'm still pretty confident here that there's going to be any outcome here is going to require Ukraine to be very strong with no restrictions on Ukraine's ability to defend its own security and its own sovereignty. Because if you put any pressure on Ukraine to restrict Ukraine, it's just going to be a matter of time before the Russians regroup and then reinvade Ukraine. And we're just going to have a larger war in Europe once again. So any kind of solution is going to require, one, I think, American leadership squeezing the Russians economically, where there's already hints coming out of, for instance, Senator Graham saying he thinks President Trump or Secretary Bessent are ready to lead the Europeans to do more to squeeze the Russian economy and stop the war effort. But then also you've got to have Ukraine. Ukraine is the forefront of its own security. The Europeans have said that they're going to do more to rearm to protect Ukraine. So that has to happen if we are going to have lasting peace.
That's Rebecca Heinrichs, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and the official national security and foreign policy correspondent for the Scott Jennings Show. I want to zoom out on the issue of foreign policy in general. It seems to me that for a good chunk of 2025, President Trump has been known as really a foreign policy president. He's been active all over the world. And because of that, I think his poll numbers are going up, at least in that sector. Hollywood Sean, let's hear from CNN data analyst Harry Enton about how the president is viewed by the American people on foreign policy. Sean, are you there? Is anyone there? We're having the Scott Jennings Show today, and it typically airs at this time on this network, and traditionally, Sean would be behind the board.
This is one of the areas in which Donald Trump is performing significantly better than he was in term one. One of his best issues relative to term one. What are we talking about? Approval of Trump on foreign policy at this point in term one. Look, Donald Trump was just at a 35% approval rating, up like a rocket. We're talking about 43% now. That's an 8-point rise. On the net approval rating, we're talking about a double-digit rise. The American people like much more of what they're seeing from Donald Trump in foreign policy in term two than they did in term number one.
That's Harry Enton from CNN. Rebecca, what do you make of the president's overall foreign policy record here in Trump 2.0?
Well, look, I mean, he continues to say it's peace through strength. He's not interested in foreign adventures. What he's interested in is what can I do in a variety of means with all the tools I have as the strongest economic and military power in the world? What can I do to make the American people and the American way of life more secure, free, and prosperous? And so you see that he's not looking to use military force if he doesn't have to, but he will if pushed. So you saw Operation Midnight Hammer, where he took out the Iranian nuclear program, collaboration with Israel for Israel's efforts to take out Iranian proxies throughout the region, take out the Houthis to open up sea lanes. And then, of course, you've got the president willing to use military force to take out cartels. And so the American people are looking at this like, look, we just want to be safe and free. If the president of the United States is going to do that, we're going to support that. And I think that that's really bearing out in the polls.
Let me ask you a question about politics and foreign policy. It's been my contention that since Donald Trump defied the isolationists on striking Iran and overall policy in the Middle East, that they have set sail on a course to try to destroy and destabilize the presidency and sort of separate him from his political coalition. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the latest example of this. She was a real opponent of Trump going after the Iranian nuclear facilities. There were a lot of other people who were in that bucket. But it seems like since he made that decision and defied them, they have really been on a course to try to go after Trump on virtually every other policy. Green's out there doing it again today. Is that your perception? Do you believe that that foreign policy decision was a true breaking point for some of these isolationists? They've always tried to pin this on Trump. He's never really been an isolationist. He's a pragmatist, and he engages when it's smart. He's not an isolationist.
No, he's not an isolationist because he understands that there's a connection between global security and economics. If you want to have good and flourishing trade, you've got to have stable areas to conduct trade with your allies. And so he understands that connection. And so the isolationists really thought in Trump, too, that they were going to sort of blame President Trump's more stronger, more hawkish, if you will, occasionally moves during the first Trump administration, for instance, destroying the ISIS caliphate or taking out the Iranian leader in Iraq, Qasem Soleimani, things like that. They thought that they could sort of restrain President Trump in a second term, make him turn inward and abandon his foreign policy objectives. They failed. And after Operation Midnight Hammer, they really sort of come unhinged and tried to attack President Trump as sort of being not MAGA. Of course, President Trump takes issue with that because he is the leader of the MAGA movement.
That's Rebecca Heinrichs, our foreign policy expert here at the show. More with her in a minute. Speaking of Ukraine, elderly Jews are trapped in unbearable poverty in Ukraine right now. The winter is coming. They have little food, little money, little medicine, little shelter, little heating. These folks should not have to live like this, but you can help them through the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews with a generous donation of just $25. You send $25, they send boxes of food packed full of life-saving essentials that help elderly Jews who are struggling to survive in Ukraine, facing this terrible winter right now. Do not delay. Visit urgentifcj.org, urgentifcj.org, or call them up, 866-338-IFCJ. More with Rebecca Heinrichs. We'll talk Middle East when we come back. It's Common Sense for the American people. Scott Jennings is here on the Salem Radio Network.
The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 2 minutes. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return in 1 minute. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 45 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 30 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 15 seconds. The Scott Jennings Show on the Salem Radio Network will return from break in 5 seconds.
Freedom to speak clearly with no leftist lunacy. This is the Scott Jennings Show.
More with Rebecca Heinrichs in just a moment. Quick word from our friends at Americans for a Balanced Budget. They are worried about this health insurance premium increase that is looming, this Democrat Obamacare failure looming price increase. It's on the horizon, but Republicans are in charge. Americans for a Balanced Budget is calling on Congress to prevent this massive health care tax increase set to hammer millions of hardworking Americans. They want them to come up with a plan that keeps premiums affordable for working families who buy their own coverage. There's time to act, but not much. Americans for a Balanced Budget says if the Republicans don't act, they're going to hand Democrats a political gift, one that they'll use to take back power, block the Trump agenda, and impose their woke progressive ideas on America. Go to this website, StopHealthCostHikes.com. StopHealthCostHikes.com. See what Americans for a Balanced Budget has to say and tell Congress to create a plan to keep health coverage affordable before it's too late. Rebecca, thanks for staying here with us on the line at the Scott Jennings Show. More foreign policy talk. This week, President Trump had the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBS, in the White House. What did you make of the meeting? Obviously, the president has his eye on an expansion of the Abraham Accords. Did we get closer to that outcome this week?
I think so, Scott. Now, anytime we think about U.S.-Saudi relations, you have to think about what is their core interest for the United States. One, the Saudis view the Iranians as an adversary, understanding that Iran is the greatest source of terrorism and instability in the Middle East. So collaborating with the Saudis to balance Iran is always very important. Two, to make sure that the Saudis are working with the United States to counter Iranian proxies like the Houthis so that they're not closing down energy choke points. And three, we want the Saudis more in our camp than with the Chinese, because the Chinese are always trying to pull the Saudis towards them to give the Saudis their security needs that they need in terms of military equipment, et cetera. So if we can pull the Saudis more in our camp, work with the Saudis, that increases our prospects of moving the Saudis more towards greater relations with, of course, our closest ally in the region, Israel. And so I think we're a little closer this week than we were certainly before these meetings.
Let me ask you a question about the planes that we sell Saudi Arabia. These are F-35s. That's the same plane that we sell to Israel, right?
Yes, and so this is one where I've got some questions, and it's been a tough one that the White House has had to grapple with. our cornerstone of our relations with Israel is to make sure that the Israelis have a qualitative military edge over any other country in the region. That's what keeps them safe. It's such a small country in a dangerous environment. We want to make sure Israel always has the edge. The F-35, of course, next generation stealth capability, incredible airplane. And so there's been some hesitation to sell that plane to the Saudis. And so the Israelis want to make sure that there are some conditions there, make sure that the Saudis are working towards improving relations with the Israelis as a condition to let that sale go through.
It sounded like that what the Saudis wanted out of the meeting was movement toward a two-state solution, something for the Palestinians to live in the region, I guess, side by side with Israel. I'm not sure how Israel feels about that right now, but that was sort of the condition that MBS put on joining the Abraham Accords. We saw the United Nations Security Council this week, 13-0, approve the president's peace plan for Gaza. Where do you think we are in the overall movement towards continued peace in the Middle East and sort of cleaning up this 2-year war that was caused by these barbarians who invaded Israel?
So I think that first, anytime MBS said, that's of course the leader of Saudi Arabia, the prince, anytime he talks about a two-state solution or Palestine understanding, he has to say all of that because he is the leader of a country that has the two holiest sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina. And the Palestine issue is always going to be something that they care about. Is that really what he cares about personally? No, probably not. I think, MBS wants to get rich and he wants Saudi Arabia to have a good relationship with the United States. He's much more secular and understanding those kinds of things and motivations. But I do think that progress is sort of being made more towards better relations with the Israelis, maybe even without that condition. I don't think that there's going to be a Palestinian state anytime soon or in our lifetime, Scott, not after October 7th with that genocidal attack against the Israelis by Hamas. Last point on the peace plan that President Trump put forward, huge victory for the Trump administration and the UN Security Council approving that. And really the secret to the success in that is these Arab states have to do their part, what they've committed to, which is get in there and forcibly, I think it's going to have to take disarming Hamas, which means eliminating Hamas, because Hamas is not going to disarm on its own.
The always fascinating, insightful, and expert Rebecca Heinrichs from the Hudson Institute. Thanks for the foreign policy chat today. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm off to Florida tonight. By the way, if you're in Vero Beach or nearby, I'll be at the Vero Beach Book Center Saturday morning for a book signing. Come get your copy of A Revolution of Common Sense. See you tomorrow. Scott Jennings here on the Salem Radio Network.
Fighting for free speech and Western civilization. This is the Scott Jennings Show.